The galactic conflict begins. The vast expanse of space had long been a realm of wonder and exploration for humanity. But on that fateful day, as the massive Zarn warships appeared on the outskirts of the Sol system, wonder turned to dread. The Zarn, a highly advanced reptilian species, had come not in peace, but with an ultimatum: submit or be annihilated. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, Earth's flagship, her eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the incoming Zarn fleet. The alien ships were sleek, almost organic in design, with hulls that seemed to ripple and shift like the scales of a serpent. They outnumbered the human fleet 3-1, and their technology was clearly superior. Status report, Chen barked, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Lieutenant Commander Raj Patel, her second in command, responded promptly. All ships reporting ready, Admiral. But our scans confirm what we feared. Their shielding technology is far beyond ours. Our weapons might as well be pebbles against their hulls. Chen nodded grimly. This was not unexpected, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill down her spine. Humanity had only recently ventured beyond their solar system, and while they had made remarkable progress in a short time, they were still infants compared to species like the Zarn. Options, she asked, looking around at her senior staff. The room fell silent. Traditional warfare was clearly out of the question. Even with the element of surprise, their weapons would be ineffective against the Zarn's superior defenses. It was Dr. Amelia Rice, the ship's chief scientist, who finally spoke up. What if we don't try to destroy their ships? All eyes turned to her, a mix of confusion and curiosity on their faces. Explain, Chen prompted. Rice took a deep breath. Their shielding is impenetrable to our weapons, yes. But what about precision cuts? If we can't destroy their ships, maybe we can disassemble them. The idea was met with stunned silence, followed by a burst of incredulous laughter from some of the officers. But Chen didn't laugh. Her mind was already racing with the possibilities. Go on, she urged Rice. We have experimental plasma cutters designed for asteroid mining. Rice continued, her confidence growing. They're precise enough to cut through meters of solid rock without damaging the valuable minerals inside. If we could adapt them for space combat, we could bypass their shields entirely, Chen finished, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Cut away their weapons, their engines, their life support systems. We wouldn't need to destroy their ships. We could render them inoperable. The room erupted in excited chatter. It was a crazy idea, completely outside the realm of conventional space warfare. But that was exactly why it might work. How quickly can we adapt the mining equipment? Chen asked. Rice conferred briefly with the chief engineer before responding. We can have a prototype ready in 48 hours. But Admiral, we'll need volunteers. This would require EVA combat in close proximity to enemy ships. It's incredibly dangerous. Chen nodded solemnly. Put out the call. I have a feeling we won't lack for volunteers. As the staff dispersed to begin preparations, Chen turned back to the holographic display. The Zarn fleet loomed ever closer, a seemingly insurmountable threat. But for the first time since they appeared, she felt a spark of hope. The next 48 hours were a flurry of activity. Every ship in the fleet was retrofitted with the new cutter units, sleek, maneuverable pods equipped with high-powered plasma cutters and piloted by the bravest volunteers humanity had to offer. As the deadline approached, Chen addressed the fleet. Men and women of Earth, we face an enemy that outguns us, outmatches us in every conventional sense. But we have something they don't: human ingenuity and the courage to do the unexpected. Today, we're not just fighting for our lives. We're fighting for our right to exist as a spacefaring species. Whatever happens, know that Earth stands with you. Good luck, and Godspeed. The human fleet moved into position, a David facing an alien Goliath. As the Zarn ships came into range, Chen gave the order. All ships, deploy cutters. Operation Scissorhands is a go. Hundreds of small, agile pods shot out from the human ships, streaking towards the massive Zarn vessels. The aliens, caught off guard by this unconventional tactic, scrambled to respond. Their point defense systems, designed to intercept missiles and fighters, struggled to track the nimble cutter pods. The first cutter reached its target, a Zarn destroyer at the fleet's edge. With surgical precision, it began to slice through the ship's outer hull, carving away weapon emplacements and communication arrays. More cutters joined in, systematically dismantling the Zarn vessel piece by piece. Across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. The Zarn, for all their technological superiority, found themselves helpless against this unprecedented form of attack. Their mighty shields, impenetrable to energy weapons, offered no defense against the relentless cutting beams. But the victory came at a cost. Many cutter pods were destroyed, their pilots making the ultimate sacrifice to give humanity a fighting chance. Each loss was felt keenly by Chen and the fleet, but their sacrifice galvanized the survivors to fight even harder. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the tide was turning. The once mighty Zarn fleet was being reduced to floating, helpless hulks. Ships that weren't completely disabled began to retreat, their commanders realizing too late the folly of underestimating human resourcefulness. Hours later, as the last Zarn ship fled the solar system, a cheer went up across the human fleet. Against all odds, they had prevailed. Humanity had faced its first true extraterrestrial threat and emerged victorious. In the aftermath, as the fleet began search and rescue operations for stranded Zarn survivors, Chen allowed herself a moment of reflection. This victory would change everything. Humanity had proven itself on the galactic stage, and the legend of the cutters was born. But she knew this was only the beginning. The Zarn would be back, and they wouldn't underestimate humanity a second time. The war for Earth's place in the galaxy had just begun, and humanity would need every ounce of its legendary ingenuity to survive what was to come. As the UES Defiant moved among the debris field that was once a Zarn battle group, Chen's resolve hardened. Whatever challenges lay ahead, humanity would face them head-on, armed with their newest and most potent weapon. The audacity to think outside the box. The cutters emerge. In the weeks following humanity's shocking victory over the Zarn, Earth was abuzz with activity. The improvised tactic that had saved them from annihilation was now being refined into a formal military doctrine. The age of the cutters had begun. Dr. Amelia Rice stood in the cavernous hangar of the newly christened Cutter Academy, watching as the latest batch of recruits filed in. These men and women, drawn from every corner of Earth and its colonies, represented humanity's best hope for survival in a suddenly hostile galaxy. Quite a sight, isn't it? The voice belonged to Colonel Marcus Graves, the grizzled veteran who'd been tasked with turning these civilians into the most unconventional fighting force the galaxy had ever seen. Rice nodded, her eyes still on the recruits. "They look so young," she murmured. Graves chuckled, a sound like gravel in a blender. "They always do. But don't let that fool you. These kids are the best of the best. Pilots, engineers, free climbers, deep-sea welders, anyone who's ever worked in extreme conditions or shown an aptitude for thinking on their feet." As they watched, the recruits gathered around a holographic display showing the schematics of the new Mark I cutter pods. The improvements were significant: better maneuverability, stronger armor, and most importantly, more powerful and precise cutting beams. "How long until they're ready?" Rice asked. Graves's face hardened. "Not long enough. Intel suggests the Zarn are regrouping. We need to be ready when they come back." The training regimen was brutal. Days began before dawn with punishing physical conditioning, followed by hours in zero-G simulators and virtual reality combat scenarios. The recruits learned not just how to pilot the cutter pods, but how to think like a cutter, to see a massive warship not as an indestructible fortress, but as a puzzle to be taken apart piece by piece. Casualties during training were not uncommon. The work was dangerous, the margins for error razor-thin. But with each passing week, those who remained grew stronger, faster, more cohesive as a unit. 3 months into the program, alarms blared across the academy. It wasn't a drill. Zarn scout ships detected in the Proxima Centauri system. The AI announced calmly, "All cutter units, prepare for immediate deployment." The hangar erupted into controlled chaos as recruits rushed to their pods. This would be their baptism by fire, the first real test of the cutter program. As the pods were loaded onto transport ships, Reyes caught sight of one particular recruit, Sarah Chen, niece of the famous admiral. The young woman's face was a mask of determination as she sealed her helmet and climbed into her pod. Hours later, in the inky blackness of the Proxima Centauri system, the human fleet lay in wait. The Zarn scouts, 3 of them, entered the system cautiously, clearly wary after their previous encounter with humanity. Admiral Chen's voice crackled over the comms. "All units, execute Operation Sheer Force." Like a swarm of deadly insects, the cutter pods detached from their carrier ships and streaked towards the Zarn vessels. The alien ships, caught off guard once again by the unconventional tactic, attempted to raise shields and power up weapons. But the cutters were too fast, too agile. They swarmed around the Zarn ships, their enhanced plasma beams slicing through hull plating with surgical precision. One pod, piloted by Sarah Chen, executed a daring maneuver, sliding between the segments of a Zarn ship's articulated hull to sever critical power conduits. Within minutes, it was over. 2 Zarn ships floated dead in space, their systems completely disabled. The third, crippled but still partially functional, turned tail and fled, no doubt to report back to the Zarn High Command. As the cutters returned to their carriers, a cheer went up across the human fleet. It wasn't just a victory, it was validation. The cutter program worked. Back on Earth, the success of the Proxima Centauri engagement led to a massive expansion of the cutter program. New academies were established on every major colony, churning out trained cutters at an unprecedented rate. But it wasn't just about training more soldiers. The principle behind the cutters began to influence every aspect of human military doctrine. Traditional warships were redesigned, sacrificing heavy weapons for enhanced maneuverability and the ability to deploy more cutter pods. Research into more effective cutting technologies became a top priority, with breakthroughs happening almost daily. 6 months after the first cutter deployment, humanity had transformed itself into a force that bore little resemblance to the fledgling space navy that had faced the Zarn invasion. They were leaner, faster, more adaptable, and they were ready. The Zarn, however, were not idle during this time. Reports from deep space probes and captured prisoners painted a grim picture. The Zarn were mobilizing on a massive scale, gathering a fleet that dwarfed their previous invasion force. They had underestimated humanity once. They would not make the same mistake again. As the reports came in, Dr. Rice found herself once again standing beside Colonel Graves, watching a new batch of recruits train. "Will it be enough?" she asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. Graves was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the recruits as they maneuvered through a complex obstacle course in their cutter pods. "It'll have to be," he said finally. "But remember, Doc, it's not about having the biggest guns or the strongest shields. It's about being willing to do what the enemy thinks is impossible." He gestured to the recruits. "That's what these kids represent, the human spirit, our willingness to adapt, to think outside the box. The Zarn might outnumber us, outgun us, but they'll never outthink us." As if to punctuate his words, one of the recruits executed a maneuver that should have been impossible, threading their pod through a gap barely wider than the pod itself to disable a target on the other side. Rice felt a smile tugging at her lips. Maybe, just maybe, they did have a chance. But even as hope blossomed, a new alert sounded. The Zarn fleet had been detected, approaching from multiple vectors. The true test of the cutters, and of humanity's place in the galaxy, was about to begin. As klaxons blared and recruits rushed to their stations, Rice and Graves shared a look. Whatever happened next would determine the fate of their species. The cutters were humanity's best hope, their only hope, and now it was time for them to prove their worth. Alien counter-strategies. The vastness of space was shattered by the arrival of the Zarn Armée. Thousands of ships, from nimble fighters to behemoth dreadnoughts, poured into the solar system. The sight was enough to make even the bravest human's heart skip a beat. But humanity was ready, or as ready as they could be. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the UVS Defiant, her face a mask of determination. All ships, deploy cutters. Remember your training, and may fortune favor the bold. As the human fleet's cutter pods swarmed towards the Zarn ships, something unexpected happened. The front line of Zarn vessels suddenly split apart, revealing a second wave behind them. These ships were different. Their hulls were covered in what looked like a shifting liquid metal. New contact. Lieutenant Commander Patel shouted. Unknown ship configuration. Before Chen could respond, the new Zarn ships sprang into action. As the cutters approached, the liquid metal on the hulls began to move, forming barriers and obstacles. Some cutters found their cutting beams reflected or dispersed by the strange material. Adaptive armor, Dr. Rice breathed, watching the battle unfold from the science station. They've developed a countermeasure. The battle quickly devolved into chaos. While some cutters managed to find weak points in the new Zarn defenses, many more were destroyed or disabled by the alien countermeasures. It was clear that the element of surprise that had served humanity so well in previous engagements was gone. As reports of mounting casualties flooded in, Chen made a difficult decision. All cutters, fall back to defensive positions. Standard fleet, prepare for conventional engagement. The retreat was costly, with many cutters unable to disengage in time. As the human fleet regrouped, the Zarn pressed their advantage, their new adaptive ships leading the charge. Back on Earth, the war room of the United Earth Defense Force was in uproar. The sudden shift in the battle's tide had caught everyone off guard. General Ying, the head of the UEDF, turned to Dr. Rice, who had been recalled from the Defiant for emergency consultation. Doctor, we need options. How do we counter their counter? Raya's mind raced. The adaptive armor seems to work by predicting the cutter's attack patterns and forming protective structures accordingly. If we could somehow randomize our attack vectors, or perhaps overwhelm their predictive algorithms. Her voice trailed off as a new idea struck her. What if we turned their adaptation against them? Over the next few hours, as the human fleet fought a desperate holding action against the advancing Zarn, Reyes and her team worked feverishly. They analyzed every scrap of data from the battle, looking for patterns in the Zarn's adaptive armor. Finally, Reyes presented her findings to the War Council. The Zarn armor adapts perfectly to our attacks, but it's reactive, not proactive. If we can trick it into adapting in a way that makes it vulnerable, we might have a chance. The plan was risky, bordering on insane. But with the Zarn fleet pushing deeper into the solar system, there were few other options. Admiral Chen received the new orders with a mix of hope and trepidation. All cutters, prepare for Operation Trojan Horse. May God have mercy on our souls. The battle resumed with a new intensity. This time, the cutters attacked in waves, each wave using a different attack pattern. The first waves deliberately used ineffective strategies, goading the Zarn armor into adapting in specific ways. Then came the killing stroke. The final wave of cutters attacked using a complex, three-dimensional pattern that exploited the very defenses the Zarn had created against the earlier attacks. Cutting beams found gaps in the armor, slicing through critical systems. For a moment, it seemed like the tide had turned. Zarn ships began to fall. Their vaunted adaptive armor turned into a weakness. But the aliens were nothing if not resourceful. As the battle raged on, new Zarn ships entered the fray. These vessels were different again. Instead of adaptive armor, they were surrounded by swarms of small, autonomous drones. The drones intercepted cutters, sacrificing themselves to protect their motherships. Drone screens, Paddle reported grimly. They're learning, adapting their entire battle strategy. Chen nodded, her face grim. So must we. All ships, initiate Protocol Omega. Protocol Omega was a last-ditch strategy, one that Chen had hoped never to use. The human fleet began to break apart, individual ships and squadrons scattering in seemingly random directions. To the Zarn, it must have looked like a full retreat, or perhaps a complete breakdown of command. In reality, it was anything but. Each ship and squadron had a specific role to play in this elaborate dance. Some acted as decoys, drawing Zarn forces away from key positions. Others made hit-and-run attacks, keeping the aliens off balance. And in the chaos, elite cutter squadrons slipped through gaps in the Zarn formation, striking at the heart of their fleet. The battle raged for days. Both sides took heavy losses, and more than once, it seemed like humanity was on the brink of defeat. But slowly, inexorably, the tide began to turn. The Zarn, for all their technological superiority, couldn't match the sheer adaptability of their human opponents. Every time they developed a new countermeasure, humanity found a way around it. The cutters, in particular, proved their worth time and again, their unconventional tactics keeping the Zarn constantly off balance. As the seventh day of battle dawned, the Zarn fleet began to withdraw. It wasn't a rout. The aliens retreated in good order, their remaining ships forming a defensive screen around their flagship. But it was undeniably a retreat. On the bridge of the Defiant, battered but unbowed, Admiral Chen allowed herself a small smile. All ships, stand down from combat alerts. Begin search and rescue operations. As the adrenaline of battle faded, the true cost of the victory became clear. Thousands of lives had been lost, dozens of ships destroyed. The solar system was littered with the debris of both human and Zarn vessels. But they had won. Against all odds, humanity had stood its ground against a technologically superior foe and emerged victorious. As the fleet began the long process of recovering and rebuilding, Chen couldn't help but wonder what would come next. The Zarn had been driven back, but not defeated. And now they knew the full measure of humanity's resourcefulness. The war, Chen realized, was far from over. But humanity had proven something. To the Zarn, to the galaxy, and perhaps most importantly, to themselves. They were here to stay, a force to be reckoned with among the stars. As she watched her crews at work, Chen made a silent vow. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever new threats emerged from the depths of space, humanity would face them head-on, with ingenuity, with courage, and with the indomitable spirit that had carried them this far. The age of the cutters had only just begun. Turning the tide. The aftermath of the great battle left humanity catching its breath, but there was no time for rest. Admiral Chen knew that the Zarn retreat was temporary, a chance for them to regroup and strategize. Humanity needed to press its advantage while it still could. In the weeks that followed, a flurry of activity consumed Earth and its colonies. Dr. Rice and her team worked tirelessly, analyzing every scrap of data from the battle. They knew that the key to ultimate victory lay in understanding and outmaneuvering the Zarn's adaptations. Meanwhile, Colonel Graves oversaw a radical overhaul of cutter training. "The Zarn have seen our playbook," he growled to a room full of instructors. "It's time to throw it out and write a new one." The new training regimens were brutal, pushing recruits to their absolute limits. Cutter pilots were now expected to master not just their own craft, but to understand the intricacies of large-scale fleet tactics. They drilled in swarm formations, practiced complex feints and ambushes, and learned to work in seamless coordination with traditional warships. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. Dr. Rice, in collaboration with a team of xenobiologists, made a breakthrough in understanding Zarn psychology. They're hierarchical thinkers, she explained to the War Council. Their entire strategy revolves around protecting key assets and leaders. If we can disrupt their command structure, we might be able to throw their entire fleet into disarray. This insight led to the development of Operation Kingslayer, a high-risk, high-reward strategy that would form the cornerstone of humanity's new offensive. As these preparations were underway, long-range sensors detected Zarn activity in the Alpha Centauri system. It was clear that the aliens were establishing a beachhead for their next assault. Admiral Chen knew this was their chance. "All fleets, prepare for immediate departure," she ordered. "It's time to take the fight to them." The journey to Alpha Centauri was tense. Every member of the fleet knew that this battle could decide the fate of the war. As they dropped out of FTL on the outskirts of the system, they were met with a sobering sight. The Zarn fleet was massive, easily twice the size of the force they had faced in Sol. New ship designs bristled with weaponry, and swarms of drone fighters filled the space between larger vessels. But humanity was ready. As soon as they entered the system, the human fleet split into dozens of smaller task forces, each with a specific role in the grand strategy. "All units, commence Operation Kingslayer." Chen's voice rang out across the comms. The battle began with a series of lightning-fast strikes. Squadrons of cutters, using newly developed stealth technology, slipped past the Zarn's outer defenses. Their targets were not the heavily armored capital ships, but smaller command and control vessels. As the cutters struck, sowing chaos in the Zarn formation, the main bulk of the human fleet engaged. But instead of a straightforward assault, they employed a dizzying array of feints and false retreats, constantly keeping the Zarn off balance. The Zarn responded with their own advancements. New types of adaptive armor shimmered and shifted, while energy weapons of unprecedented power lashed out at the human ships. But for every countermeasure the Zarn deployed, humanity had an answer. Swarms of micro-cutters, barely larger than missiles, overwhelmed drone screens. EMP weapons, reverse-engineered from Zarn technology, disabled entire squadrons of enemy fighters. And all the while, elite cutter teams pressed their attacks on key command ships. The battle raged for hours, then days. Both sides took heavy losses, and more than once, it seemed like the sheer weight of Zarn numbers would prevail. But slowly, inevitably, the tide began to turn. As more and more Zarn command ships were disabled or destroyed, their fleet's coordinated actions became increasingly erratic. Ships began to act independently, sometimes even firing on their own allies in the confusion. On the third day of battle, humanity scored its most significant victory yet. A team of cutters, led by the now veteran Sarah Chen, managed to breach the defenses of the Zarn flagship. In a daring assault, they fought their way to the bridge and captured the Zarn's supreme commander. With their leader taken and their command structure in shambles, the Zarn fleet began to disintegrate. Some ships continued to fight, but many more turned to flee. As the last pockets of resistance were mopped up, Admiral Chen allowed herself a moment of reflection. They had won a great victory, perhaps even a decisive one, but the cost had been enormous. The aftermath of the battle brought new challenges. With the capture of the Zarn commander came the opportunity for communication, for understanding. It was a chance not just to end the war, but to forge a new future for both species. As diplomatic talks began, Dr. Rice found herself in a new role, that of xenodiplomat. Her insights into Zarn psychology proved invaluable in negotiations. "They're not evil," she explained to the Earth government. "Just different. They saw our expansion as a threat. If we can show them we're not their enemies, we might be able to turn this into a lasting peace." The road ahead would not be easy. There were those on both sides who called for continued war, for retribution. But as the weeks turned to months, and the fighting gradually ceased, a new era of cautious cooperation began to emerge. Cutter technology, originally developed for war, found new applications in deep space exploration and rescue operations. Joint human-Zarn scientific missions were proposed, aiming to unlock the secrets of the galaxy together rather than fighting over them. As Admiral Chen watched a group of human and Zarn engineers working together to adapt cutter technology for peaceful purposes, she felt a sense of hope she hadn't experienced since before the war began. Maybe, she mused to Colonel Graves, who stood beside her, This is what we were really fighting for all along, not just to survive, but to prove that we deserve our place among the stars. Graves nodded, a rare smile crossing his weathered features. The cutters started as weapons, he said, but in the end, they became bridges. Who would have thought? As the sun set on this new era of galactic cooperation, both humans and Zarn looked to the stars with renewed wonder. The age of conflict was ending. The age of exploration was just beginning. And at the forefront of this new age stood the cutters, once the tip of humanity's spear, now the vanguard of a brighter future for all species in the galaxy. Resolution and aftermath. 10 years had passed since the Battle of Alpha Centauri, a decade marked by profound change for both humanity and the Zarn. The Galactic Concordat, signed 2 years after the battle, had ushered in an era of uneasy peace that gradually evolved into genuine cooperation. Admiral Sarah Chen, now Ambassador Chen, stood on the observation deck of Harmony Station, a massive joint human-Zarn construction project orbiting a neutral star system. The station was a testament to how far both species had come, and a symbol of how much further they could go together. Quite a view, isn't it? The voice belonged to Scathar, Chen's Zarn counterpart, and against all odds her friend. Chen nodded, her eyes fixed on the swirling nebula visible through the station's transparent aluminum windows. Sometimes I still can't believe we made it here. Scathar's scales rippled in what Chen had learned was a gesture of agreement. From mortal enemies to partners in galactic exploration, our ancestors would think us mad. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Amelia Reyes, now head of the Joint Species Scientific Initiative. Ambassador, emissary, she greeted them. It's time. The first deep space cutter expedition is ready to launch. Together, they made their way to the launch bay. The ship waiting for them was unlike anything that had existed during the war. It was a cutter, yes, but one designed for exploration rather than combat. Its cutting beams had been modified to collect samples from asteroids and comets, while its agile frame allowed it to navigate treacherous cosmic phenomena. The crew was a mix of humans and Zarn, all veterans of the war who had chosen to turn their skills towards peaceful endeavors. As Chen looked at their faces, some smooth, some scaled, all filled with anticipation, she felt a swell of pride. 10 years ago, she began, addressing the crew, we stood on opposite sides of a conflict that threatened to destroy us all. Today, we stand united, ready to face the unknown together. Your mission is to go further than any of our species have gone before, to seek out new life, new civilizations, and to forge bonds of friendship across the stars. Scathar stepped forward. You carry with you not just the hopes of humanity and the Zarn, but the promise of what can be achieved when former enemies choose cooperation over conflict. May your journey be safe, and may you return with wonders beyond our imagining. As the ship prepared for launch, Chen couldn't help but reflect on the long, difficult road that had led to this moment. The war had been devastating, the losses on both sides almost too great to comprehend. But from those ashes, something remarkable had grown. The cutters, once symbols of humanity's desperate ingenuity in the face of annihilation, had become the embodiment of a new philosophy. The same creativity and adaptability that had made them fearsome weapons now drove them to overcome the challenges of peace. Former cutter pilots now led joint rescue operations, using their skills to save lives rather than take them. The adaptive armor technology of the Zarn, combined with human miniaturization techniques, had revolutionized spacesuit design, allowing for unprecedented exploration of hostile environments. But perhaps most importantly, the spirit of the cutters, the willingness to think outside the box, to find solutions where none seemed possible, had infected both species. It drove them to overcome centuries of mistrust, to push past comfortable assumptions, and forge genuine understanding. As the exploration ship vanished into the depths of space, Chen felt a familiar mix of anxiety and exhilaration. The galaxy was vast, filled with wonders and dangers beyond imagining. But now, Humanity wouldn't face those challenges alone. "What do you think they'll find out there?" Rise asked, her voice filled with the same curiosity that had driven her throughout the war and beyond. Chen smiled. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I do know this. Whatever they find, they'll face it the way we've faced everything since this all began. Together, with open minds and the courage to cut through any obstacle." Scathar made a sound that Chen had come to recognize as laughter. "You humans and your cutting metaphors," he said, but there was warmth in his voice. As they turned to leave the launch bay, Chen caught sight of a memorial plaque on the wall. It bore the names of all those who had fallen in the war, human and Zarn alike. Below the names was an inscription in both languages. They fought as enemies, but died as the first citizens of a united galaxy. May their sacrifice light our way to the stars. Chen placed her hand on the plaque for a moment, a gesture of respect and remembrance. Then she straightened, turning her gaze back to the stars visible through the station's windows. The war was over. The cutters had served their purpose, evolving from weapons to tools of peace. But their spirit, the indomitable human spirit that had allowed a fledgling spacefaring race to stand against a superior foe, that would live on. As Chen watched the stars, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, humanity was ready. They had earned their place in the galaxy, not just through force of arms, but through the strength of their convictions and their willingness to extend a hand in friendship even to those who had once been enemies. The future was uncertain, filled with both promise and peril. But one thing was clear: humanity's greatest adventure was just beginning, and the cutters would lead the way.